Hi everyone! So the video ran a little bit long, so I'm going to go ahead and make this two parts. The first part is a lot about my personal trauma story. I get very in-depth on personal things. We go into the different types of trauma and the symptoms that go along with that. And then next week I will post part 2, and that will be over the brain, how trauma and PTSD affect the brain, and ACE scores, different types of trauma, and what you can do at home to start relieving this trauma on your own. And normally I like to edit and post videos on like Thursday and Friday, so I'm sorry about this coming out late, but it was a long video, a lot of editing. I'm adding a lot more effects to my videos now, so hopefully they'll be a little bit more entertaining. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next week for part 2.
Hello and welcome back. My name is Michelle and I am a spiritual life coach and wannabe spiritual teacher. Thank you for coming back, and if you're new to the channel, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It'll be in the corner over here or over here, and hit that notification bell so that you can be notified when I put out a new video. And today's video is going to be about what nobody really wants to talk about and nobody really wants to deal with: trauma.
This is exactly what I was afraid of.
So before we get into the video, I just want everyone to know that PTSD and experiencing trauma in your life, you can absolutely 100% heal from this. Trauma is not a mental illness that you're born with. It's not a chemical imbalance, and it's something that you've developed, and you can reprogram your brain to get out of that fight, flight, or freeze state.
This is it. You get what I'm saying? This is it.
You're not damaged and you're not broken. Your brain might just be a little confused and it needs some love and attention to help fix the problem. And not trying to diminish anyone's trauma experience whatsoever. You are entitled 100% to feel however you feel about what happened to you. And you may also feel like no one really understands what happened to you or what you went through or what you're continuing to go through with some symptoms that can come up from stored trauma. So I want to acknowledge your feelings. Your feelings are real. They are valid. You deserve to feel hurt and be confused. But also, trauma can sometimes get a bad rap because post-traumatic growth is a real and miraculous thing. Which is probably, honestly, the best thing that you can get out of a really traumatic experience. So let's get into the video. So let's start off with, what is trauma? Trauma is an event that occurs that shatters your sense of security. You start to believe that the world is a very dangerous place and you are no longer safe. Your nervous system is triggered and it tells your brain and your body that you are in constant danger. The reason why I have so much knowledge in this area is because I have complex PTSD, or I did have complex PTSD. Now I have no symptoms whatsoever of PTSD at all, but I mean, it was a 10-year long process, and these are the things that I've learned in my journey. And I'll talk a little bit about that just so you can relate to me and know that I've been through some really hard things, and I speak from experience and knowledge gained, and with nothing but absolute compassion for you and every single thing that you've been through as well. So, and this is actually the perfect time for me to do this video because I actually did have a very triggering event happen early in the week. So I had a man call me. I'm a life coach, so he was calling about my services. He went into a story about his childhood and how he had been inappropriately touched and had inappropriately touched his mother from a child all the way to 25. And so I thought, okay, maybe I can help this guy with the assistance of a trauma therapist as well. But after he told me about his horrendous trauma as a child, he began to tell me about a sexual assault that he had just got arrested for. And it was very bad. It was very bad. He hurt a woman very bad. And
I feel the need to say the F word now.
I'll spare you guys the details because obviously you're traumatized too, and there is a large percentage of people that have been sexually abused or sexually assaulted. So I don't want to trigger anyone here, but it was very triggering for me, and I did slip back into a fear response and an emotional flashback. Somebody help me! Somebody help me! And that flashback took me back to when I was a child and I was being sexually abused. It reminded me of the fear that I felt all the time, and that came back up in my system, and it registered as, okay, I'm in danger. I'm not safe. This is not a safe experience. And I'll be honest, when I'm out and about now, I see men and automatically think that they are dangerous. So there is some reprogramming that still needs to be done for me. But of course, this is not something that just goes away. And I mean, it can be healed and your symptoms can be greatly alleviated or completely gone. But sometimes they will leave and then come back like years later, or when a triggering event like this happens, they will resurface. So you have to be aware of that. You may never be totally healed, but you can be significantly better. So in addition to the abuse that I suffered as a child, I also experienced a string of very traumatic events. I had someone very, very close to me commit suicide. Not only that, but I was extremely suicidal for years. And being suicidal and being severely depressed in that way, in and of itself, is traumatic, because you never think that you're gonna want to die so bad. And then later on in life, you look back at that and you just feel so bad and so sad for that person that went through that. And that's something that I feel that I'm still recovering from, is who I used to be and how sad that existence was. In addition to being really suicidal, I also started self-harming at the age of 12. I started having sex way too young. And it messed with my head a lot. And because I had sex so young, and I also messed around with my boyfriend on the band bus, and some people saw, I was bullied pretty bad in high school, and that was awful. They called me so many names, and it was really very hurtful. And honestly, the amount of sexual trauma and shame that I've experienced in my life has really affected, my romantic relationships and feeling safe in that. So that's also, that's just a part of the territory, and that's something that, I'm still healing from even to this day. It's an everyday process. You have to get up and want to be better every single day and do what it takes to get yourself out of that adrenaline response that your body is automatically having without you not having any control. and your brain controls that, and we'll get into that. So now that you know a little bit about my trauma story, and that's, I spared you a lot of details because obviously I don't have a lot of time here to get across all the information that I want to get across, but also I don't know if I'm ready to share all of the traumatic things that have happened to me. And it's okay if you aren't either. It's totally okay. So let's discuss the different types of trauma. So there's acute trauma, chronic trauma, and then complex trauma. And I want to say also that I am not a mental health professional. I haven't went to school for any of this. This is me speaking from my own experience, me living through this trauma and me going through the process of figuring out how to get rid of the trauma, how to heal from trauma, how to move forward in a, quote unquote normal life. So none of this advice is professional advice. Only do what your body feels comfortable with, what your mind feels comfortable with, and nothing more than that. So acute trauma normally comes from one incident. Maybe you have, everybody has trauma, but maybe you had a little bit of childhood stuff, but it wasn't, so bad to where it triggered the different responses in your brain. But it was a single event. Maybe it was someone tried to rob you on the street, car accident, natural disaster. And the event was extreme enough to threaten your emotional and physical security. And this event creates a lasting impression in your mind, and it can affect the way you behave and think. And chronic trauma is what happens when someone experiences multiple long-term, prolonged, distressing, or traumatic events. And that could be suffering from a chronic illness, sexual abuse, domestic violence, bullying, and exposure to just extreme situations like war. And several events of acute trauma or multiple one-time event traumas happening in a row, kind of like what I talked about while I was growing up. It was like a string of events. If all of those combine and that goes untreated, then you can develop chronic trauma. And complex trauma, or sometimes referred to as childhood trauma, or complex PTSD or childhood PTSD, is the result of varied and multiple traumatic events. The events are normally interpersonal, so it's between people and relationships. And it gives some people the feeling of being trapped or scared. And complex trauma normally has a really severe impact on your brain and the way that you think. And this normally shows up in victims of childhood abuse, neglect, domestic violence, family disputes, and other repetitive situations, such as civil unrest. And it affects the person's overall health, relationships, and how they act in a job or at school. Some of the other symptoms that you might have, and it's not limited to this list whatsoever. I have had a crazy amount of symptoms, so it's not one size fits all for this. But some cognitive changes are intrusive thoughts, nightmares, flashbacks to the event, confusion, difficulty with memory and concentration, and fatigue or exhaustion, and also mood swings. Altered behavior patterns, such as avoiding any triggers that remind you of the experience. So say you got in a car accident, so you avoid driving. And anytime you hear car horns, you are immediately triggered into that fight, flight, or freeze system. You're withdrawing from family, you're isolating yourself. Also, your brain can put you in similar traumatic events to relive that trauma and try to rewrite it for you. So this is something that happens really often, especially with people that have complex PTSD or have really severe trauma. So like, for instance, in my case, because of the abuse that I suffered as a child, I would put myself in dangerous situations where I was able to be taken advantage of sexually. And it wasn't like an active choice. I mean, there might be something to do with like low self-worth and not feeling like you deserve any better than that, but also it's your brain trying to heal that. It's putting yourself back in that situation to try and rewrite it. So if you've experienced some trauma and you're, putting yourself in dangerous situations, or you're trying to like relive that trauma somehow, don't make yourself feel bad, or try not to have a lot of judgment towards yourself, because it's a very natural response for people to have with this type of trauma. So some psychological concerns are obviously anxiety, panic attacks, fear, anger, irritability, obsessions or compulsions, shock, disbelief, emotional numbing and detachment, one of my personal favorites, depression, shame, and guilt. And especially survivor's guilt. So if you experience something where you were the only one that made it out, you may feel some survivor's guilt, and that's completely normal. Some physical problems could be difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep way too long, being easily startled. I still have a hard time with that one. And hypervigilance, edginess, that's still something that I struggle with. Rapid heartbeat, unexplained aches and pains, sexual dysfunction, altered eating patterns, muscle tension, or extreme exhaustion. And for me, it even got as severe as having seizures. So when my trauma started resurfacing, so I'd repressed the sexual abuse for like years. And it was like as soon as I turned 18 and I was going to start being an adult, my seizures started happening. And I had seizures for about a year. I went to doctors, I saw neurologists, and had CT scans, CAT scans, EKGs, EEGs, and everything came back like totally normal. So the neurologist suggested that there may be some underlying trauma that I should be seeing a specialist for. And so once I went to therapy, shortly after I started going to therapy, the seizures actually stopped. But my physical symptoms, and I think sometimes they call it conversion disorder, which is basically where you have psychological stress and it automatically converts to physical symptoms, which I feel like everybody kind of has that to some extent, but some of those things included like extreme headaches or migraines, canker sores, really, really bad, IBS, inflammation, joint pain. I've also heard that if you have enough stress or trauma in your life, your hair can actually start falling out. And again, this is not a comprehensive list. If you're experiencing any physical symptoms and the doctors cannot explain what's going on with you, I would really consider looking into starting therapy or seeing if there's any trauma that you're not dealing with, and start to get those things figured out. Also, another symptom that I think is really huge, especially with people that have PTSD or have had a lot of trauma in their life, is addiction. And you could be trying to self-medicate with alcohol, weed or prescription drugs, even the medicine that, is prescribed to us to keep us calm can also become very addicting. But just so you know, all of the self-medicating is only a temporary fix, and you're going to have to deal with that stuff eventually. You can't run forever. So in pain, if you're having a lot of body pain, which I had an issue where I just had chronic pain for, probably about a year. So I contracted mono Epstein-Barr virus at one point, and then ever since then, I've been in a lot of pain, and I thought that I had developed an autoimmune disorder, which nothing has come up for that, so I guess I'm fine. And then also I read this book, and it's called Healing Back Pain, and it's by John E. Sarno. He's an MD, and I don't know if you guys know about book cures, but I read this book, and as soon as I read it, I stopped having pain. It's possible to retrain your brain, reprogram your brain to stop chronic pain if you can identify the source of that pain. And another good method is to get into a semi-meditative state and tune into that pain, locate it, find out where it is in your body, and just sit with it and see what comes up. Can you describe the pain? Does it have a shape or a color or a texture? I had some pain in my shoulder back here, like in one of my shoulder blades, and when I tuned into it, it was like a dark green steel wool type of texture, and that was really strange to have that experience of pain like that. And also, is there any emotions around that pain? Is there sadness there? Is there fear? Is there grief? Is there shame or guilt? And does your inner child need some attention? Is that where the sadness is coming from? Is that child that had been neglected their whole life and now you're still neglecting them?
Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next week for part 2. Have a wonderful and magical week.
I wanted to say thank you to my husband, Caleb, for making all of my meditation music and the intro and outros to all of my videos. Thank you so much for supporting me and loving me.